Hello, everyone. Our group is going to be analyzing the Australian wireless communication industry. Firstly, we're going to analyze the objectives of the study. Then, we're going to look at the industry itself by looking at the product, the supply side, and the demand side. And then finally, we're going to give our key takeaways. The first objective of the study is to analyze the industry itself by looking at the market structure, the current outlook, as well as briefly mentioning the future outlook of the industry. We also want to provide insights into the industry by looking at key metrics and financial data, assess the benefits and drawbacks of entering the industry, and then finally give our opinion for any business who wants to enter the industry.
Starting with the definition of the market, the industry of wireless communication compiles all the relationships established between the companies that provide with this service and their customers. It is important to point out that this is the smallest sector within the industry of telecommunications, as it only compiles 13% of this. However, it's the fastest growing as a result of the shift to mobile devices, with, for example, the development of smartphones in the past decade and the introduction of cloud based technology. Furthermore, this market is full of opportunities. For example, as Australia has many remote and inaccessible towns and farms, they all demand better connection to urban areas. Also, people overall demand faster and more effective connectivity, higher resolution in video streaming, and a bigger offer in multimedia apps. The market has experienced a huge increase in the past years, resulting in a revenue of 22.9 billion Australian dollars, compiling 1.59% of the national GDP. If we compare this to 2015, there was a growth of 257.3% as a result of the development of IoT. What is interesting is are the future opportunities, as it is expected to grow to 65 billion Australian dollars, which is an increase of 283.84% by 2023, and this will make up 3.1% of the GDP. This is partially due to the introduction of 5G in all the Australian territory, and therefore it is a good field for investment. Moving on to the product, wireless services include the provision of voice, text, and data transmission through wireless means. This includes a series of hotspots throughout the area that they cover, which in our case is Australia. And the transmission is performed among the customers, including individuals, small and large businesses, and also the government. Their main source of revenue is the sale of subscription plans. The main competition of this market are the suppliers of the same services, but made through cables, which, if we complement with the other communication platforms, such as the ones that are displayed on the screens, um, become another mean of communication alternative to wireless. Their similarity is obvious as they both provide the same services, but they differ in terms of the mobility that the wireless services provide against the suppliers of fixed networks. Also, there is a price advantage as wireless services are way cheaper than wired networks. And to end with the product, this is a summary of the mobile plans that the three biggest companies in the field recommend among all that they offer. And as we can see, there is a tendency to homogeneity.
In the next part of this presentation, I'm going to be talking about something that's dear to us and economics, which is demand and supply. I'll start with supply. The market structure here in this industry is organized as an oligopoly. As we see, three major key players have 88% of market share, and they do possess some sort of monopoly power. Why I would like to say some is because of the competitive nature of the market, the regulations set by the Australians, and the gradual thinning of margins that we've seen in the past 5 years. If another company would like to come into this industry, we must look into the barriers of entry. First being the economies of scale. All three key players have great economies of scale. They have a lot of capital as well as a lot of infrastructure. Similarly, in this industry, there's also a loyal customer base, as people tend not to change between network providers that often due to their SIM card plans or their phone plans, as well as there are some regulatory clearances we need for the license following the regulation and anti-competition laws that have been set by Australia. More so, we also need higher investment costs for infrastructure development in rural Australia, which now has also been put into the network operators to do and not done by purely the government. And moving on to the next slide, the thin margins that we've been seeing. This is very important because this would define whether or not this market is compatible and if this market is actually profitable. Because in the last 5 years, there has been an 8.3 annual decrease of prices, whereas just in the year 2017-2018, the data allowances went up by 172%, which we can see in this graph that I have presented here. So what this essentially means is they're providing more service or less money, which means their margins are getting lower and lower every year. Is this market truly profitable to enter? We will find out. Now I'd like to move into the demand. When I mention demand, I would like to focus more on the consumer than anything else, because we know there is a demand for this industry, but we want to look more into the consumer. So now, who are the potential consumers? Essentially, every average Joe in Australia would be a consumer. The consumer would essentially be anybody of working age, just because you can't open a bank account, you can't get a job, you can't rent a house without mobile phones these days and having personal mobile numbers. Now I'd also want to look at consumer tendencies. The two major ones that have been repeated and seen everywhere is that consumers are favoring mobiles over fixed voice services, which we can see in the graph on the right, where June 2016, 2017, and 2018, and looking at the mobile originating phone calls compared to the fixed line originating phone calls. Similarly, mobile handsets are also becoming the most common way to access the internet, as just in the year 2018, 45% of data use increased, including calls and streaming, gaming, and downloads and such. Now I'd also quickly want to just go through some other factors that might be interesting to understand the consumer and the demand here. So demand of substitute goods. The substitute good would be traditional fixed calls, but this has been decreasing gradually every year. In the year 2017-2018, 16 billion minutes to 12 billion minutes. So that's 4 billion minutes that decreased only in that year of fixed voice calls. Similarly, in terms of talking about price comparison with competitors, we would need a big initial investment, and it is a competitive market, so we might not have price leadership, and all the competitors have a similar price range. Taxes is also very important, as 30% of taxable income is levied on all companies, as well as companies with a revenue over 25 million Australian dollars are further levied another 0.11% on revenue and not income, which is rather expensive. And we don't necessarily see possibilities to influence consumer preferences that much, because we may not be able to have cheaper prices or provide bigger data allocations. We could possibly give access to inclusion such as Music Pass, Google Pass, and Spotify, but that comes at a higher cost.
For a conclusion, we're first going to focus on the obstacles that new entering firms are going to face when entering the industry. As we said before, this is an oligopoly, and there are certain characteristics that this industry follows. Apart from the market share and how 3 firms control most of the market share, firms can also enjoy economies of scale in this industry because of the large amount of consumers that they have and their ability to spread out costs. This is especially relevant as they can also enjoy network economies of scale, in which they have already established networks, which means that they can add users with relatively low costs because of it. And this is especially relevant for the telephone industry because of the requirement for these grids and these networks that are already in place. Also, there's very high investment costs, capital requirements initially because of the need for this infrastructure. And this is especially relevant for Australia because there's a large territory and a lot of rural areas which require connection, and it's quite large relative to its population. There are also other barriers to entry, such as legal barriers, regulations, and licensing needed, and also the fact that there is a very limited customer base because, as we said before, all the three big companies already have a lot of the market share, and also that the fact that each user will not have normally more than one plan, as they only have one mobile phone, and it's quite a contrast to other industries where consumers can buy from different providers without having to stick to one. But in this situation, normally when you have a mobile plan, you're not going to get another one because you're not going to have multiple phones, and this is a barrier to entry for entering firms because of the loyalty to current the incumbents from customers. Finally, there's also the question of pricing out by big firms. As we saw before, there's thin margins that may not be sustainable for new, smaller firms that are entering the market. There was an 8.3% annual drop in revenues. And also the fact that the products, since they're homogeneous, as they normally provide the same service, this can lead to price wars in which the large incumbents can lower prices to push out new firms. In terms of benefits for entering firms, firstly, there's the fact that this is the fastest growing telecommunication sector with a 257% growth since 2015 and a projected future growth of 283% by 2023 to revenues of 65 billion. There's also the fact that the demand is increasing for mobile minutes, as we saw around 4 billion minutes more demand from that year on year, and this is projected to continue to grow. There's also the fact that there's a large consumer base because of the necessity for phones and how, whether it's for personal use or for work, phones are demanded and are used regularly. And also the fact that consumer tendencies show that there's more demand for mobile specifically, and how it's the preferred method of internet, the preferred method to use to connect to the internet. Also, finally, there's the fact that there's a lot of resilience from the industry to external shocks compared to other industries. As we're seeing right now, especially with the COVID-19 crisis, mobile phone services or telecommunication services are still as crucial even for external shocks such as this, and because of the necessity of the product compared to others which can be cut out. And this is important as it shows the resilience, and it's a big benefit for new firms. Because of these conditions, we believe that there are three key requirements for firms who want to enter the industry. The first one is an ability to take on high investment costs. This is because there is a lot of infrastructure needed to create networks necessary to supply and provide these services, and these require very high capital investment costs as well as high fixed costs for an entering firm. And there's a requirement to have an ability to be able to provide these. The second is take advantage of the economies of scale by increasing the level of production and spreading fixed costs around all the users. This can be, for example, through, as mentioned before, network economies of scale, in which after putting the networks in place, firms can take on additional customers without increasing their costs. Also, others can be technical economies of scale, financial by accessing capital more easily, or bulk buying. Finally, we also recommend for a firm to tailor to consumer tendencies. And this can include, for example, including additional perks in the services, in the packages with other services such as Spotify, for example, or as well as lowering prices, allocating more data to the packages, or improving rural connectivity.